Hey everyone, it's Carissa and welcome back to another Satur-YAY where we are celebrating the weekend by getting our craft on. Today I'm going to create a couple of fall or Thanksgiving themed projects using the new Gourd-jus dies from the Essentials by Ellen line, as well as the Thankful stamp set. It is finally starting to feel like fall here in California, so I felt like I could finally jump on the fall project bandwagon. So I'm taking a few of the dies from the Gourd-jus die set, which these dies are truly gorgeous, and I'm cutting them out of some watercolor paper. Now here I'm just using some plain old watercolor paper. I chose this because it has a little bit more cream base than the Tim Holtz watercolor paper, but in the end I don't think that it really mattered. And I'm going to cut these a few times. You notice that I'm leaving the shapes in the watercolor paper as much as possible because I want to watercolor these all as one unit. So once I get those cut out, I'm going to take them over to the craft mat and you can see me popping the dies out and leaving the shapes in the negative space. Now, if they don't stay in the negative space, you can just pop them right back in. And if you're having a hard time keeping them in their place, you can use a little Post-it tape on the back of that to keep them in. But in the end, I find that it works pretty well if you just leave it flat on your surface. So I'm going to take and just wet this entire piece of cardstock with all the shapes in it with a little bit of clean water. And I am going to do some watercoloring with the Tim Holtz Distress Stains. I'm starting out with the Fossilized Amber, and like I said before, I wanted to watercolor these all as one unit. So this makes it really super fast and easy. I'm just tapping on the colors. This is a little bit of the frayed burlap. I wanted to bring in some brown. And for my orange, I at first started with the Ripe Persimmon, but I found that the Wild Honey was a better match for the tones that I was using. The Ripe Persimmon was a little bit bright, so I'm going to tap these. And if the colors overlap, that's okay, as long as you're not tapping two colors that are kind of going to create mud. And then for all of my green tones, I'm using this Peeled Paint Distress Stain, and I'm tapping over the tops of those pumpkins and on some of the leaves. Now, once I get all of my colors added, if I want to kind of soften some of those colors, I can go back in with my wet paintbrush here and just some clean water, or I can use this to kind of blend some of those colors together as well. And once I get those kind of blended, I am going to go back over certain areas and add just a touch more color by just dabbing those on. And then I'm going to set them aside and let them air dry, or let's be honest, I didn't let them air dry. I hit them with my heat tool. I'm a busy woman. I got to get these things dried. So once I let them dry, or I got them all dried with my heat tool, I went ahead and popped them out. And I am left with these beautiful watercolored shapes. Some of them I am going to trim down to make the shapes a little bit different, like this pumpkin here. I just cut out the outermost rounded portion of that pumpkin to make it a little bit different shape, and that's going to create a little bit more interest on the front of my card rather than using that same shape over and over again. So I decided that in this grouping I wanted a little bit of a vine shape, so I actually grabbed the Poinsettia and Pine die set from the Essentials by Ellen line, and once again I'm just going to quickly watercolor these with some Distress Stain. Here you're seeing me actually press the Distress Stain onto my craft mat and then paint it on with a wet paintbrush. This is going to give me a little bit more muted look than tapping it directly on. And then to intensify some of those edges, I just went back over it with the Distress Stain dauber and just kind of dabbed some darker places on that. So to create my card front, I am using the largest of the small stitched rectangles from Lawn Fawn. I love these, and it's just going to add a beautiful stitch detail to the front outside edge of my card. And now I'm going to take this little nesting die. This is a nesting label die from We Are Memory Keepers. And I am going to deboss it onto the front of my cardstock just to kind of create a frame for all of my pieces. So I've taken the tab 1 on my Big Shot platform, and I am using the same sandwich that you would use to emboss with a embossing folder, but instead of an embossing folder, I'm adding that tan mat there, or Sizzix makes a rubber mat, and that will just deboss that shape into the card front, and you can see that there as I'm putting this together. So I've kind of created my grouping there, and now I'm going to take this stamp This is from that thankful stamp set that I showed you earlier. And I didn't want to use that as thankful for you. I just wanted this card sentiment to say thankful. So I've gone ahead and cut that apart carefully using my scissors. And now I'm preparing a piece of vellum, Essentials by Ellen Vellum, with some EK Success powder tool because I'm going to gold heat emboss this sentiment on that. So I'm just inking it up in some Versamark ink and stamping it onto that prepped vellum. And then I'm going to coat it with some Ranger Superfine Detail Gold Embossing Powder. I'll just tap off the excess there. Sometimes you get some places that aren't quite coated, so be sure to check that out before you heat set it. You can go back and sprinkle a little more on, and then allow your heat tool to kind of heat up before you take it to that vellum to minimize the warping. So once I got that embossed, I'm going to go ahead and take it over to my trimmer and trim that down. And it was at this point I decided I wanted to add a little gold detail to these shapes as well. So I'm just taking my Versamark ink pad here and just tapping all around those shapes. It's going to give me just kind of a really rough edge of gold once I add the embossing powder. Now, if you don't want to take the ink pad directly to your shapes, you can also use one of my favorite tools in the craft room, which is a makeup sponge. I've just cut it down into a little teeny wedge here, and I'm just tapping on that Versamark ink around the edges as well. Both will give you the same result. It's just, if you want a little more control, you should probably use something like the makeup sponge. But I try to let my free side go every now and then and just tap it with the ink pad. So I've kind of sprinkled and dipped all those shapes with that same superfine detail gold embossing powder. And I am going to go back and clean some of these up with just a dry paintbrush, just dusting off some of the extra gold embossing powder that got in places that I really didn't want it. There's my control freak coming out in me. And I went ahead and heat set those, and that gave me just a beautiful gold detail. Now you see my phone there on my work surface. I had arranged these shapes into a grouping that I really liked earlier. So I went ahead and took a picture of that with my cell phone, and now I am just adding some liquid glue to the back of those. This is a Zig 2-way glue pen, and attaching those onto my card front. Take this little word of caution from me. When you are working with your cell phone on your work surface, be careful not to get glue, glitter, pigment spray, any of those things on it. Just trust me, I know this from experience. You can always tell a crafter's cell phone, I think. So now I'm just attaching the pumpkins or the gourds here with a little bit of foam adhesive. I've just cut those down in some little teeny tiny strips. And this sentiment piece I'm going to attach with a little bit of multi-matte medium. I've just tapped that on to the back of that sentiment strip where the embossing powder or the embossed image will kind of disguise that. And then I'm going to finish this card front off with a mixture of some of this fall mix of Pretty Pink Posh sequins and some 4mm gold metallic Pretty Pink Posh sequins. And that's just going to give it a little shimmer and shine. Now I mounted that whole card front onto a piece of metallic cardstock from Tim Holtz and then put that on that same wood grain embossed cardstock, that Essentials by Ellen cardstock for my card base. So I had some extra shapes and I thought, what could I do with these? And it dawned on me, these would make perfect place cards for Thanksgiving. So I am taking the second largest of the small stitched rectangles from that same stitched rectangle die set that I used earlier from Lawn Fawn. And I've cut those out 5 times because there's 5 people in my family. And then I did a little math here, and I figured out that I needed to score these at 1 3/8. So that's 1 1/4 plus one more little dash over, which is 1/8 of an inch. That gives you 1 3/8. And I've scored that using my Martha Stewart scoreboard and my Teflon bone folder. And I've creased those. And then I'm going to add my shapes on again with this Zig 2-way glue pen, but I'm going to make sure that I only have adhesive on the bottom portion of those because where that folds, I don't want those shapes to stick. And then once again, I added my gourd on with a little bit of foam adhesive. Now for my names, because I really cannot stand my handwriting, I went ahead and printed these out on my laser printer on some Essentials by Ellen Vellum. I used the Euphoria script font here, and I've just cut these down into strips, and I am going to use a little bit of this rose gold deco foil and run this through my mini Mink machine here. And this is going to leave me with some beautifully foiled name pieces for my place cards. Now, I didn't want to run through the entire use of the Mink Mini with you because I did that in a previous Satur-YAY, so I'll be sure that I link that below. But you can see when I remove that foil, these are beautiful, and they're going to make a beautiful addition to the Thanksgiving table. So I just kind of trim those down into some banner shapes. I'm attaching them with a little bit of the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. I'm just kind of sliding it behind that grouping of shapes that I have there. And then, of course, once again, I'm just going to finish these place cards off with a little bit of that fall mix of sequins from Pretty Pink Posh, as well as the 4mm gold sequins from Pretty Pink Posh. And you can see these are going to be so much fun. I used a variety of the shapes, including the pumpkins and the little squash, as well as the vines and the leaves. So here's a look at all of the projects I created today using these gorgeous dies from the Essentials by Ellen Line. As always, I will have all the products used in these projects linked over at the Classroom blog, and you can find that link below in the YouTube description. Thanks for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed this project, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.